The judge held the sealed envelope like it weighed more than the entire estate. My sister Danielle didn't even look nervous. She had already told everyone Grandma promised her everything, every account, every property, every last decision. So why did Grandma leave one instruction nobody was allowed to open until now? And why had Danielle tried so hard to make sure I never saw it? "Genesis has no claim here," she said loud enough for the whole courtroom. She was never part of this. I didn't respond. I just kept my eyes on that envelope, the one thing Danielle couldn't rewrite. Because if I was wrong, I'd lose everything. But if I wasn't, then this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. If you're watching from somewhere else, tell me your country and what time it is where you are. And if stories like this stay with you, you can follow along for the rest. 2 months before my grandmother passed, the house on Coral Ridge Drive still smelled like lemon polish and old paper. Grandma Margaret Edwards had lived there for 37 years. Every drawer had a system. Every bill was filed. Every receipt dated. She believed that clarity prevented conflict. I believed that too. That's probably why I was the one she trusted with her paperwork. I didn't move back in or anything dramatic like that. I had my own place in downtown San Diego, a stable job as a compliance analyst, and a life that didn't revolve around family approval. But twice a week I'd stop by after work, sit with her at the dining table, and go through statements, utilities, investment summaries, insurance renewals. It was routine, quiet, predictable, until it wasn't. Danielle started showing up more often. At first it looked like concern. She brought flowers, took Grandma to brunch, laughed louder than usual, like she was performing care instead of feeling it. No one questioned it. Danielle had always been the one people admired. Confident, polished. The kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they owed her attention. I was different, practical, reserved. The one who noticed things but didn't always say them out loud. "You don't visit enough," Danielle told me one evening as she leaned against the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone. "You just show up when there's paperwork." Grandma looked up from her tea like she was about to say something, then didn't. "I come when she asks," I said, keeping my tone even. Danielle smiled without looking at me. "Of course you do." It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them, soft enough to sound harmless, pointed enough to stick. That night when Danielle stepped outside to take a call, Grandma reached across the table and tapped the folder in front of me. "Genesis," she said quietly. "You always read everything right." I nodded. "Always." "Good." She didn't explain why that mattered, and I didn't push. Not yet. A week later, I noticed the first change. Grandma had a standing appointment with Richard Keller, the family attorney. It was on her calendar every other Thursday at 10. I'd driven her there myself more times than I could count. But when I checked the calendar that morning, the entry was gone. Not crossed out, not moved, just gone. "Did you cancel with Keller?" I asked her. Grandma hesitated just for a second. "No, I thought Danielle was handling that now." That wasn't how this worked. Handling what exactly? Before she could answer, Danielle walked in, car keys in hand. "We're running late," she said brightly. "Come on, Grandma." I looked between them. Late for what? Danielle didn't slow down. "An appointment." "With Keller?" I asked. She paused just long enough to meet my eyes. "I've got it covered." That was the first time she said it like that. Not we. Not Grandma and I. Just her. I followed them out to the driveway anyway. "I usually go to these," I said, trying to keep it neutral. It helps to have a second set of eyes on the documents. Danielle opened the passenger door for Grandma and gave me a look that felt rehearsed. Relax, Genesis. It's not that complicated. It is if something changes. She laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. You worry too much. Grandma didn't say anything as she got into the car. That bothered me more than Danielle's tone, because Grandma always said something. I stood there as they drove off, the engine noise fading down the street, and tried to tell myself I was overreacting. People change routines all the time. But that night when I came back to review her mail, I noticed something else. A folder was missing. It wasn't labeled anything dramatic, just a state draft. I'd seen it a dozen times before, tucked neatly between insurance documents and property records. Now there was a gap in the drawer where it used to be. I checked the rest of the cabinet. The desk. The small safe in the hallway. Nothing. Did you move the estate file? I asked Grandma. She frowned slightly. No. I don't think so. Her voice carried that same uncertainty I'd heard earlier. Not confusion. Uncertainty. Like she wasn't sure what she was allowed to say. That feeling sat with me all night. So the next morning I did something I hadn't done before. I called Keller's office directly. Hi, this is Genesis Edwards, I said. I usually accompany my grandmother Margaret Edwards to her appointments. I just wanted to confirm her next meeting time. There was a pause on the other end. Then I'm sorry, Ms. Edwards. We can only discuss scheduling with the client or the authorized contact. Authorized contact, I repeated. Yes, Ms. Danielle Edwards has been coordinating the recent appointments. Of course she had. Was there a meeting yesterday? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm not at liberty to share details, the receptionist said carefully, but she didn't say no. I thanked her and hung up my mind, already working through what that meant. Danielle wasn't just visiting more. She was positioning herself, controlling access, controlling information. And somehow she had convinced Keller's office to treat her as the primary contact. I drove back to Grandma's house that afternoon without calling ahead. Danielle's car wasn't in the driveway. Inside, everything looked the same, too clean, too organized. But the energy felt different, quieter, like something had been rearranged just enough that you couldn't point to it, but you could feel it. Grandma was in the living room, a blanket over her lap. Hi, sweetheart, she said, smiling. I sat beside her. We need to talk about the appointments. Her smile faded just a little. Danielle said she's helping, she replied. So you don't have to worry. I do worry, I said, because things are changing and I'm not being told how. She looked down at her hands. For a moment I thought she might explain everything. Instead, she said something else. Genesis, you need to pay attention now. The same words, exact same tone. Not emotional, not dramatic. Just deliberate. I felt a chill I couldn't quite explain. Pay attention to what I asked. She shook her head slightly. Just don't assume things are what they look like. Before I could press further, her phone buzzed on the side table. Danielle's name lit up the screen. Grandma picked it up immediately. Hi, honey, she said into the phone, her voice shifting lighter, easier. I sat there watching as she listened. Then she nodded. Yes, I understand. When she hung up, she didn't meet my eyes. She's coming by later, Grandma said. We'll go over a few things together. We. That word again. But this time I knew I wasn't included. I stayed a few more minutes trying to piece together what I could from small details, the way certain folders had been moved, the absence of notes Grandma usually kept on the corner of the desk. Then I stood. I'll come back tomorrow, I said. Grandma nodded, but her attention was already drifting. As I walked out, I glanced once more at the filing cabinet. That empty space where the estate draft used to be, it felt louder now, more intentional, more final. I got to my car and sat there for a full minute replaying everything. The canceled appointment, the missing file, the shift in tone. And those 2 sentences Grandma had repeated like they mattered more than anything else. You always read everything right. Pay attention now. I didn't know exactly what Danielle was doing, but I knew one thing. She didn't want me involved. And that meant whatever she was doing wouldn't hold up if I was. I didn't confront Danielle right away. That wasn't my instinct. It never had been. In compliance, you don't act on suspicion, you build a timeline first. You identify patterns. You let people keep talking until they contradict themselves. So I went back to something simple. Documents. 2 days later, I showed up at Keller and Associates without telling anyone. The receptionist recognized me. I'd been there enough times with Grandma that my presence didn't feel unusual, just less expected. "Hi," I said. "I know you can't share details, but I was hoping to confirm whether my grandmother has any upcoming filings." She hesitated, fingers resting on the keyboard. "I'm sorry, Ms. Edwards." I understand, I cut in gently. "I'm not asking for content, just whether anything has been finalized recently." That gave her room. She glanced at the screen, then back at me. "There are pending items," she said carefully, "but nothing formally submitted as of this morning." Pending. That meant documents existed but weren't locked in yet. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. As I turned to leave, a door down the hallway opened. Richard Keller stepped out mid-conversation with someone inside. He stopped when he saw me. "Genesis," he said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to be excluded either," I replied. It came out calmer than I felt. He glanced toward the receptionist, then motioned for me to step into his office. The door closed behind us with a quiet click. "What's going on?" I asked. Keller exhaled slowly, like he was choosing every word. "Your grandmother has made some adjustments to how she wants meetings handled. Meaning Danielle," I said. He didn't confirm it directly. He didn't have to. "I still review her documents," I added, "or I used to." "Yes," he said. "I'm aware." That answer told me more than anything else. "You've seen the changes then." Another pause. "Genesis, your grandmother is still the client. My role is to follow her instructions." "Are those instructions coming from her?" I asked. That landed. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing not defensively but cautiously. "I haven't observed anything that would legally invalidate her decisions," he said. Legally. That word mattered. It meant there were things he had noticed, but they hadn't crossed a clear legal threshold yet. "Is there a final will?" I asked. "There are drafts," he said. "Multiple, yes." That wasn't normal. Grandma revised things occasionally, but not repeatedly in a short span. "Has anything been signed?" I pressed. "Not in the form that would be considered final and binding," he replied. "So nothing official?" "Not yet." That gave me time. As I stood to leave, he added something I wasn't expecting. "There is an additional instruction your grandmother prepared." I turned back. "What kind of instruction?" He hesitated. "One that is not to be discussed until a specific condition is met." "A sealed document?" I asked. His silence confirmed it. "Does Danielle know about it?" I asked. "I can't speak to that," he said, but the way he avoided my eyes told me enough. She might not. And that meant whatever she was doing, whatever she thought she had secured, was incomplete. "Thank you," I said quietly. This time I meant something different. I wasn't thanking him for information. I was acknowledging that he had just confirmed something critical without technically breaking any rules. When I stepped back into the hallway, my pulse felt steadier. Not calmer, sharper. I left the office and sat in my car replaying everything. Pending documents, no final will, a sealed instruction that would only be revealed under certain conditions. Danielle was moving fast, but she wasn't finished. And that meant she was vulnerable. That night I went back to Grandma's house again. Danielle's car was already there. Of course it was. I walked in without knocking. It was still family, still my right. Voices carried from the dining room. Just sign it. Mom. Danielle was saying her tone low but firm. We've already talked about this. I thought we were waiting, Grandma replied. We are waiting, Danielle said quickly. This is just preparation. I stepped into the doorway. Preparation for what? Both of them turned. Danielle's expression shifted, first surprise, then irritation, then something more controlled. Genesis, she said. We didn't expect you. I can tell. On the table between them was a folder. Not the same one that had gone missing, but similar. Clean. Organized. Too ready. What is that? I asked. Nothing you need to worry about, Danielle replied. Grandma looked between us, tension settling into her shoulders. I'd like to see it, I said. Danielle closed the folder with one smooth motion. No, just that. Not even pretending. That's not how this works, I said, keeping my voice level. I've been reviewing her documents for years. And now you're not, Danielle said. Things change. Why, I asked. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because I'm here now. There it was again. Not about Grandma, about control. I stepped closer to the table. If you're making changes to legal documents, I need to make sure they're consistent with what's already in place. Danielle leaned back in her chair, completely unbothered on the surface. You don't need to do anything, she said. This is between me and Mom. Mom. She'd started using that more lately, too, a subtle shift positioning herself as the primary daughter, the one in charge. Grandma opened her mouth like she might say something, then stopped. That silence again. It was different now. Heavier. Grandma, I said gently, do you want me to review this? For a second, I thought she might say yes. Instead, she looked down. I trust Danielle to help, she said. Not answer. Deflection. Danielle watched me carefully, measuring my reaction. I didn't give her one. All right, I said. Just that. No argument. No escalation. That seemed to throw her off more than anything else. You're just going to walk away, she asked. For now. I turned and left the room before either of them could say anything else. Because pushing harder right then wouldn't help. It would just make her tighten control. Outside, the air felt cooler than it should have. I sat in my car again, hands resting on the steering wheel, and forced myself to slow down. Emotion doesn't win cases. Patterns do. Danielle was moving documents quickly, limiting access, creating urgency. That was a strategy, and strategies leave traces. I just had to find them. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Genesis Edwards. Yes, this is Ethan Cole, the voice said. I believe you were asking about a transaction earlier today. I straightened in my seat. Yes, I said. I was. There was a pause. Then I think you should come in. There are details that weren't included in the standard record. My grip tightened slightly on the wheel. What kind of details? Another pause. The kind that don't usually happen when the account holder is present. That was enough. I'll be there, I said. As I hung up, one thought settled clearly in my mind. This wasn't just about documents anymore. Something had already been done. And whatever it was, Danielle didn't expect anyone to look closely enough to catch it. I got to the bank 20 minutes earlier than I needed to. Not because I was eager, but because I needed the extra time to think. Ethan Cole hadn't said much on the phone, but he didn't have to. In my line of work, tone mattered more than content. And his had been careful, measured. The kind of careful that usually meant someone was stepping just close enough to policy to say something they probably shouldn't. The branch was quiet when I walked in. Midday weekday, no lines, no noise. Just the low hum of printers and muted conversations behind glass offices. Ethan was already waiting. He stood when he saw me like he wasn't sure whether to treat this as a formal meeting or something less official. "Ms. Edwards," he said. "Genesis is fine." He nodded, then gestured toward a small office in the back. Once the door closed, the air shifted. More contained. More serious. "I need to be clear about something first," he said. "I can't disclose protected account details without authorization." "I understand," I replied. "I'm not asking you to violate policy." That was true. I was asking him to tell me what he could without crossing a line that would make him shut down. He studied me for a second, then sat. "What I can talk about," he said slowly, "are procedural irregularities." That word again. Irregularities. "What kind?" I asked. He reached for a folder on his desk, not handing it to me, just opening it enough to glance at something inside. "There was a transaction processed 3 weeks ago," he said. "A large transfer from your grandmother's primary account. I saw the amount I said. I didn't see anything about the authorization. That's where it gets complicated." I didn't interrupt. Normally, he continued, for a transfer of that size, especially for a client of her age, we require either in-person verification or a confirmed callback procedure. "Was that done?" I asked. He hesitated. There was documentation on file that allowed for a third-party authorization. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice even. "A power of attorney?" "Yes." "Temporary?" I asked. He nodded. "And the person authorized was, I can't confirm names," he cut in gently. "You don't have to," I said. "I already know." That seemed to settle something for him. "The issue," he went on, "is not that the authorization existed. It's how it was used," I said. He met my eyes. "Yes." Silence stretched for a moment. "Walk me through it," I said. He took a breath. "The authorization document was presented digitally in advance," he explained. "Which isn't unusual, but the in-person verification that should have followed didn't happen in the way it typically does." "In what way?" "There was a signature," he said, "but it wasn't witnessed by the staff member assigned to the account." "Then who witnessed it?" Another pause. "A substitute officer. Someone unfamiliar with her file." Yes, that was enough to create a gap. Not illegal on its own, but exploitable. "Was my grandmother physically present?" I asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. "That's the part I can't confirm directly," he said, "but I can tell you this. There's no internal record of her entering the branch that day." I leaned back slightly, letting that settle. Because in my world, absence was just as important as presence. No entry log, no standard verification. "A substitute officer," I said quietly, "and a large transfer." He nodded. Those elements together, raise questions. Questions that should have triggered a review, I added. They did, he said. That caught my attention. And the documentation technically met the minimum requirements, he replied. So the transaction wasn't blocked. Minimum requirements. The phrase sat wrong. Do you still have the authorization on file? I asked. Yes. Is it consistent with previous records? That was the question. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed the folder slowly. I can't give you a copy, he said, but I can tell you. The signature didn't match perfectly. Not perfectly. That was as close as he could get to saying it. Different enough to be flagged, I asked. It was noted, he said. Not escalated. Of course it wasn't. Because everything had been engineered to sit right on the edge of acceptable. Was there any follow-up with the account holder? I asked. Yes, he said. And the confirmation call was completed. I felt a flicker of relief, then doubt. Who answered? I asked. Ethan's expression didn't change. That information is part of the protected record, which meant one thing. He couldn't say it, but he didn't need to. If Grandma had answered, he would have said so someone else confirmed it, I said. He didn't respond, but the silence confirmed everything. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just rushed, I said. It was structured. That's one way to look at it, he replied. It's the only way to look at it. He didn't argue. Instead, he reached for a notepad and slid it across the desk, not with anything written on it, just a blank page. For your own records, he said. Write down what you already know. Build your timeline. I looked at him. You're telling me to document it. I'm telling you, he said carefully, that patterns matter more than isolated events. That was something I already believed, but hearing it from him changed the weight of it. Thank you, I said. He gave a small nod. Just be careful, he added. If this becomes a formal dispute, everything will be examined. Not just the transaction. I know. And I did. Because once you open something like this, you don't get to control how far it goes. I left the bank with more than I'd come for. Not proof. Not yet. But structure. A sequence. A way to show that what happened wasn't random. It was designed. I sat in my car again. Same position, same stillness, but everything felt sharper now. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. Dates, appointments, missing files, unauthorized changes, the transfer, the confirmation gap. Line by line, it started to take shape. Not a story, a pattern. And patterns don't rely on opinion. They rely on repetition, which meant if Danielle had done this once, there was a chance she'd done something else too. I circled the date of the transfer. 3 weeks ago. Then I flipped back through my notes. That was the same week the estate draft disappeared. The same week the appointment with Keller had been handled. The same week Grandma had started hesitating before answering simple questions. My pen paused over the page, because for the first time everything lined up. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to see direction. Enough to know where to look next. I closed the notebook and leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the car. Danielle hadn't just stepped in to help. She had taken control of timing, of access, of verification. And she had done it carefully enough that nothing alone looked wrong. But together, it told a very different story. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Danielle. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Genesis, she said, her voice light, almost casual. Where are you out? I replied. I stopped by Grandma's. She continued. We went over a few things. You don't need to come by tonight. There it was. Control. Again. I'll decide that, I said. A small pause, then a soft laugh. You're making this harder than it needs to be. For who I asked. Silence. Then, for everyone. I didn't respond. Because that wasn't true. It wasn't harder for everyone. It was harder for her, and she knew it. Just trust me, she added. I'm taking care of things. I looked down at the notebook in my lap, at the dates, the gaps, the things that didn't match. I don't think you are, I said quietly. The line went silent for a second longer than it should have. Then she spoke again, same tone, same calm. That's your choice. She hung up. I sat there, phone still in my hand, replaying her last words. Not defensive, not angry, controlled, which meant she wasn't worried yet. She still believed she was ahead, that I didn't have enough to challenge her, and she was right. I didn't. Not yet. But I had something else now. Direction. Because if she had structured the transaction that carefully, then whatever came next would be just as deliberate. And that meant it would leave another trace. I just had to find it before she finished whatever she started. I didn't go home after the bank. I went back to the same cafe across the street and sat in the corner booth where no one would interrupt me. I ordered coffee I didn't touch and opened my notebook again. When something is structured, it repeats. Same timing, same access points, same weak spots. Danielle hadn't improvised that transaction. She had designed it to pass just under scrutiny, which meant she would reuse the same strategy somewhere else. I wrote one question at the top of the page. Where else would she need control? The answer came faster than I expected. Legal authority. If she had used a temporary power of attorney at the bank, she would need the same or something similar to support changes to the estate. I flipped to the section where I'd written down Keller's comments. Not finalized. Multiple drafts. Sealed instruction. That last one mattered more now, because if Danielle didn't know about it, she couldn't plan around it. But everything else, she was already moving. I pulled out my phone and called Keller's office again. This time I didn't ask for information. I need to review all prior authorizations on file for Margaret Edwards, I said. Any document that grants third-party authority, even temporarily. There was a pause. Are you authorized to request that the receptionist asked? I've been part of the document review process for years, I replied. If that's changed, I'd like that noted formally. Another pause. Longer. Let me speak with Mr. Keller, she said. I waited. 3 minutes later, Keller himself came on the line. Genesis. I need to know if there's a power of attorney on file that I haven't seen, I said. He didn't answer right away. That depends on how you define on file, he said carefully. Any document that has been presented, referenced, or used in connection with your office, I replied. Silence. Then, there was a document presented, he said. Yes. Was it executed through your office? No. That matched what Ethan had said. Was it verified? Another pause. It was reviewed for facial validity, he said, meaning it looked acceptable, not that it had been fully authenticated. Did my grandmother sign it in your presence? I asked. No. Did you recommend it? No. That was the first clear line he'd drawn. Then why was it accepted at all? I asked. Because he said, choosing his words again, it did not present an immediate legal deficiency. Minimum threshold. Same pattern. Do you still have a copy? I asked. Yes, I want to see it. That may not be possible without your grandmother's direct authorization. She's not in a condition to manage these requests consistently, I said. You know that. Another silence, then lower Genesis. Be careful with how you frame that. He wasn't warning me about tone. He was warning me about implications. Because once you suggest diminished capacity, everything changes. I'm not making claims, I said. I'm asking questions, and I've answered what I can. I closed my eyes for a second, thinking. Then I shifted. Is there anything in that document that conflicts with previous estate drafts, I asked? He didn't answer immediately, which was an answer. Yes, I said quietly. There is. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Another pause. Then he said something I hadn't expected. If you are concerned about consistency, he said you should ensure that all documents are reviewed together, not in isolation. Together, not isolated. He was giving me direction without giving me data. Thank you, I said. When I hung up, I underlined one word in my notebook. Consistency. Because that's what Danielle had been relying on, or rather the appearance of it. Each document, each action just valid enough on its own, but not designed to be examined side by side. That was the gap, and if I could force everything into the same frame, the inconsistencies would surface on their own. I finished my coffee without realizing it had gone cold. Then I headed back to the bank. Not to Ethan, to the records desk. This time I requested something simpler. I need a transaction summary for the past 6 months, I said. No sensitive details, just dates, amounts, and transaction types. That was allowed. No authorization needed for high-level summaries tied to my previous involvement. The printout took 5 minutes. I took it to a table and started scanning. At first, nothing stood out. Routine expenses, scheduled payments, predictable patterns. Then I saw it. Not another large transfer. Something smaller. Repeated. 3 entries over the past month. Same amount. Same classification. Administrative fee. That didn't make sense. Grandma didn't use services that generated recurring admin fees. She avoided unnecessary charges. I circled the entries, then checked the dates. Each one lined up within 48 hours of something else. An appointment, a document revision, a bank interaction. My pulse picked up slightly, because this wasn't random. It was coordination. I walked back to the desk. Can you tell me what these administrative fees are tied to? I asked. The clerk glanced at the page. Those would be service processing charges, she said. For what service, I'd need to look at the internal notes. Please. She hesitated, then nodded. After a minute, she looked back up. They're associated with document handling, she said. What kind of documents? Another pause. Authorization related. There it was again. Same category, different angle. So every time a document was processed, I said slowly, there was a fee attached. Yes. And those dates match in-person activity. Generally, yes. I thanked her and stepped away, because now the pattern was clearer. Danielle hadn't just created one document. She had created or at least used multiple authorization-related documents across several interactions, each one small enough to avoid attention, but together they formed a sequence. And sequences tell intent. I sat back down and mapped it out. Week 1 appointment change. Week 2 authorization used. Week 3 transaction completed. Week 4 follow-up documentation. All tied together by timing, all tied together by access, and all happening while Grandma's direct involvement became less visible. I leaned back staring at the page. This wasn't just about one transfer anymore. It was about a system Danielle had built. A controlled environment where she handled the inputs, managed the outputs, and limited anyone else from seeing the full picture. Except she hadn't accounted for one thing, me looking at everything at once. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. From Danielle. We need to talk tonight. No greeting, no explanation, just that. I stared at the message for a second, then replied. About what? Her response came almost immediately. About you making things harder than they need to be. I looked back down at my notes, at the pattern, at the dates, at the way everything connected. Then I typed, good. Then we should talk about everything. There was a longer pause this time, long enough to feel intentional. Then her reply came through. Fine. Come by at 7. Alone. Alone. That word sat heavier than the rest, because it wasn't a request. It was a condition. I locked my phone and stood up, folding the printout carefully. Danielle wanted control of the conversation. Of course she did. She always did. But this time I wasn't walking in without understanding what she'd been doing. And now, for the first time, I was starting to see it clearly enough to ask the right questions. I didn't go to my apartment before heading to my mom's house. I sat in my car a block away for 10 minutes, going over the timeline one more time, not because I doubted it, but because I needed to walk in without reacting. Danielle expected emotion, frustration, accusation, something she could dismiss. What she didn't expect was structure. When I finally stepped inside, the house felt different, quieter than usual. No TV, no background noise, just the soft clink of glass from the dining room. Danielle was already there, sitting at the table like she owned the space, a glass of wine in her hand, a folder in front of her. Of course. Right on time, she said without standing. Let's not pretend this is casual, I replied, taking the seat across from her. She smiled slightly. Fair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. You've been asking questions, she said. Calling people, showing up unannounced. That tends to happen when things don't add up. She exhaled through her nose like I was being difficult on purpose. You're turning this into something it doesn't need to be. Then explain it, I said. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. It's simple, she said. Grandma asked me to take over. I did. That's not what I asked. A pause. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. What exactly do you think is happening here, Genesis? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the printout from the bank, sliding it across the table between us. 3 administrative charges, I said. Same classification, same timing pattern, all tied to authorization processing. Her gaze dropped to the paper. No surprise. That told me she recognized it immediately. You've been busy, she said, almost amused. Just paying attention, I replied. She picked up the page, scanned it once, then set it back down. These are standard, she said. You're reading into it. Then walk me through it, I said. What documents were processed on those dates? She leaned back in her chair. I don't need to justify every administrative detail to you. You do if those details are being used to move money and restructure legal authority. That landed. Her expression didn't crack, but it tightened. You're making assumptions, she said. I'm identifying patterns. Silence. Then she laughed softly. God, you've always been like this, she said. Everything is a system with you. Everything has to fit into some neat explanation. And you've always relied on things not being examined too closely, I said. That was the first moment the tone shifted. Subtle, but real. She set the wine glass down slower this time. Careful, she said. You're stepping into territory you don't understand. I understand enough, I replied. Temporary authorization, unwitnessed signature, substitute verification, confirmation call that didn't go to Grandma. Her eyes snapped up. There it was. Not panic, but recognition. You've been digging deeper than I expected, she said quietly. I'm not guessing anymore, I said. So I'll ask you directly, did you use a power of attorney that wasn't properly executed? The room went still. For a second I thought she might deny it outright. Instead, she did something else. She smiled. Not warm, not friendly, controlled. You're asking the wrong question, she said. Then give me the right one. Another pause. Then she leaned forward again, lowering her voice. Do you really think Grandma didn't know what she was doing? That wasn't an answer. It was a pivot. I think she trusted you, I said. And I think you used that. Danielle's smile faded just a fraction. I took care of things, she said. Things you weren't around for. I was there, I replied, until you made sure I wasn't. She didn't deny that. Instead, she tapped the folder in front of her. You want to see what we've been working on, she asked. I didn't move. Open it, I said. She held my gaze for a second longer, then flipped it open. Inside were documents. Clean, structured, professional, estate revisions, asset allocations, signatures. All of it looked legitimate. Too legitimate. I scanned the first page, then the second. Everything aligned. No obvious errors, no glaring inconsistencies, which meant she had done exactly what I thought she would. She had built everything just within acceptable limits. This is what you've been worried about, she asked. Because it all checks out. On its own, I said. What? Each document. I continued. Individually, it passes. But together, I looked up at her. They don't align. A flicker. There and gone. Explain, she said. The timeline, I replied. The order of execution. The supporting authorizations. The transaction activity. I tapped the printout again. You didn't build a system, I said. You built pieces, and you assumed no one would put them side by side. Her jaw tightened slightly. You're overcomplicating this. No, I said quietly. You underplanned it. That hit harder, because it wasn't emotional. It was precise. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she closed the folder. You think this is enough? She asked. A few patterns and suspicions. No, I said. I think it's the beginning. She leaned back again, crossing her arms. You don't have proof, she said. Not yet. Then what exactly are you planning to do? I held her gaze. I'm going to put everything in the same room, I said. Every document, every transaction, every authorization. And then I'm going to let the inconsistencies speak for themselves. Silence. Longer this time. Heavier, because now she understood what I was actually doing. Not accusing, not reacting, building. You're really going to drag this into court, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She studied me for a moment, then unexpectedly she laughed. Not dismissive, almost impressed. I underestimated you, she said. I know. That didn't provoke her. If anything, it settled something. She picked up her glass again, took a slow sip, then set it down. Then let me be clear about something, she said. I waited. If you do this, she continued, it doesn't stay between us. I'm aware. Everything gets looked at, she said. Grandma's decisions, her capacity, her intentions. I know. And if there's even a suggestion that she wasn't fully in control, I'm not suggesting that I cut in. Then, what are you suggesting? She asked sharply. That someone made sure the process worked in their favor, I said. Her eyes held mine, searching, measuring. Then she nodded once. All right, she said. Just that. No argument. No denial. Which told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't going to fight me here, because this wasn't the place she planned to win. Do what you think you need to do, she added. I stood gathering my papers. I will. As I turned to leave, her voice stopped me. Genesis. I looked back. For what it's worth, she said, I didn't do this to hurt you. I held her gaze for a second, then answered honestly. I believe you. Because I did. Danielle didn't see this as betrayal. She saw it as correction, as taking what she believed should have been hers, which made it harder and clearer at the same time. I walked out without another word. Once I got to my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there letting the conversation settle. She hadn't denied the structure. She hadn't challenged the pattern. She had only questioned whether I could prove it, which meant she was confident in one thing, that I didn't have enough yet. And she was right, but not for long, because now I knew exactly where the gaps were, and more importantly, I knew what she was counting on me not to connect. The family meeting wasn't scheduled through me. Of course it wasn't. I found out about it from my mom, Linda, through a short, almost hesitant call. Danielle thinks it's time we all sit down, she said. Just to settle things. Settle things. That was Danielle's language. Controlled, final, framed like a favor. What exactly are we settling? I asked. A pause. Your grandmother's wishes, Mom replied. Not the estate, not the documents. Her wishes. I agreed to come, not because I expected honesty, but because I knew Danielle wouldn't move forward without creating the appearance of consensus first, and I wanted to see how she planned to do that. The house was full when I arrived. Aunts, an uncle, 2 cousins who barely visited unless something serious was happening. Everyone gathered in the living room, voices low, conversations fragmented. Danielle stood near the center of it all, calm, composed, in control. She greeted me like nothing had happened. Genesis, she said with a small smile. I'm glad you came. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. Her eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. Then she turned back to the room. All right, she said, raising her voice just enough. Let's get started. Everyone settled. Mom sat beside her. Close. Supportive. I took a seat across from them, far enough to observe, close enough to be heard. Danielle placed a stack of documents on the coffee table. This is just a summary, she began, of what Mom and I have been working through with Grandma over the past few weeks. Mom nodded, even though she hadn't been part of most of it. I know this has been a difficult time, Danielle continued, and I want to make sure everything is handled the way Grandma intended. That line landed exactly where she wanted it to. No one wanted to question intention. Not in a room like that. She's made it clear, Danielle went on, that she wants things simplified, consolidated, managed by one person. She didn't say her own name. She didn't need to. Given the complexity of the assets she added and the need for consistency, she asked me to take that responsibility. There it was, framed as duty, not advantage. My uncle nodded slowly. That makes sense, he said. You've always been good with that kind of thing. Danielle smiled just enough. I watched the room. No one asked for details. No one asked to see the documents, because Danielle had already given them something easier to accept. A story. She also wanted to avoid conflict, Danielle said, so she structured everything in a way that prevents unnecessary disputes. That was when I spoke. By removing everyone else's ability to question it. The room went quiet. Danielle didn't react immediately. She let the silence sit like she was deciding whether to engage. Then she turned to me. No, she said calmly, by making things clear. Clear to who I asked. To the person responsible for executing it, she replied. And that's you, I said. Yes. No hesitation. No apology. I nodded once, then leaned forward slightly. Then let's make it clear for everyone, I said. Walk us through the actual changes. A few heads turned. Subtle shifts in attention. Danielle noticed. Of course she did. This isn't the time for a full review, she said. That's why we have legal representation. We do, I said. And they've confirmed nothing is finalized. That landed harder. Mom looked at Danielle. Is that true? Danielle's expression didn't change. There are pending items, she said. That's normal. It's also normal I added to review documents before asking people to agree to them. I'm not asking for agreement, Danielle said. I'm informing you of the structure. That you expect no one to challenge, I replied. Her tone sharpened just slightly. I expect people to respect Grandma's wishes. And how do we verify those wishes, I asked. Silence. Because that was the question she didn't want asked. My cousin shifted in her seat. I mean, can we see what she signed? She asked carefully. Danielle turned to her, smile returning. You will? She said. At the appropriate time. When is that, I asked. When everything is finalized, so after it can't be questioned, I said. The room shifted again, not dramatically, but enough. Danielle exhaled slowly, then picked up a document from the stack. This, she said, holding it up, is the current structure. She handed it to Mom first. Then it moved around the room. When it reached me, I didn't rush. I read it, line by line. Allocation percentages, control clauses, execution authority. It was clean. Too clean. Everything flowed logically. Except for one thing, the sequence. The dates didn't align with what I had mapped out. Where's the authorization supporting this revision, I asked, looking up. Danielle didn't miss a beat. It's on file. Which one, I asked. The relevant one, she replied. That's not an answer. It's the only one you need. I set the document down. No, I said. It's the one you want us to accept. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Genesis, you've used at least one temporary authorization already, I said. We both know that. The room went still again. Mom looked between us. What does that mean? It means, I said without taking my eyes off Danielle, that decisions may have been made under authority that wasn't properly established. That's not true, Danielle said quickly. Then show it, I replied. Show what the authorization I said, the one that aligns with this timeline. A beat. 2. 3. Danielle didn't reach for another document. She didn't open the folder. She just looked at me. And for the first time, she didn't have something ready. You're creating confusion, she said finally. There's no issue here. Then clarity should be easy, I said. No one spoke. Because now the room felt different. Not divided. Just uncertain. Danielle straightened slightly, regaining her posture. "This is exactly what Grandma wanted to avoid," she said. "Disputes. Doubt. Division. No," I said quietly. She wanted transparency. "That's what I'm providing." "Then provide it fully." Another silence. Then my uncle cleared his throat. Maybe it's worth having everything reviewed together," he said. "Just to be sure." There it was. Small, but enough. Danielle heard it too. Her gaze flicked toward him, then back to me. "You've made your point," she said. "I haven't even started," I replied. That wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Because this wasn't about winning the room. It was about opening it. And now it was open. Just enough. Danielle gathered the documents back into a neat stack. "We're done here," she said. No one argued, because no one knew what else to say. As people started to stand conversations low and uncertain, Danielle leaned closer to me. "This doesn't end the way you think it will," she said under her breath. I met her eyes. "It already started ending," I replied. I walked out before she could respond. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, sharper, because the shift had happened. Not in evidence, not in court, but in perception. And that was the first thing Danielle had truly lost control of. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A message from my lawyer, Mark Ellison. "We need to file now. There's something you should know before court." I stared at the screen, because I hadn't told him about tonight yet, which meant whatever he had found was independent of everything I'd just uncovered. And if that was true, then this wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was about to become proof. I didn't call Mark back right away. I read the message 3 times, trying to figure out what kind of something would make him push to file immediately. Mark wasn't reactive. He didn't escalate unless he had a reason that could hold up under scrutiny. That meant whatever he found, it connected. I started the engine and drove straight to his office. It was already dark when I got there, but his light was still on. He didn't waste time with small talk when I walked in. "Close the door," he said. I did. He slid a folder across his desk toward me. "I pulled records tied to your grandmother's estate filings," he said. "Not just through Keller's office, through county submission logs." I sat down, opening the folder carefully. Inside were timestamps. Submission attempts. Document IDs. At first glance, it looked routine. Then I saw the pattern. These were uploaded. I said slowly, but not finalized. "Correct," Mark replied. Multiple drafts submitted, then withdrawn or replaced within short intervals. I flipped through the pages. Dates I recognized. The same weeks I had mapped. The same windows where things didn't line up. Who submitted them, I asked. "Electronically," he said. "They're tied to an authorized user credential." Danielle. He didn't say the name, but he didn't need to. "What's the issue?" I asked. "Revisions aren't unusual." "Not at this frequency," he said, "and not with this level of structural change between versions." I looked closer. The differences weren't small. Allocation shifts, control clauses rewritten, execution authority reworded, each version just slightly different from the last. "Why submit drafts that aren't finalized?" I asked. "To establish a record," Mark said. That clicked. She wasn't just preparing documents, I said. She was creating a timeline. Exactly. A timeline that could later be presented as consistent, even if it wasn't. I leaned back slightly, letting that settle. "She assumed no one would pull all versions at once," I said. "That's a safe assumption," Mark replied. "Most disputes focus on the final document. But this one won't," I said. He nodded once. No, he agreed. It won't. I flipped to the last page. And this I asked. That he said is the part you didn't see. It was a submission log from 2 days ago. A document had been uploaded then flagged. Not by the system, by a reviewer. There was a note Mark said. Internal. It questioned whether the supporting authorization matched the scope of the changes. My pulse picked up slightly. And it wasn't escalated, he said. But it was recorded. Minimum threshold again. Everything sitting just below the line. But now it's part of the record, I said. Yes. I closed the folder slowly. This is enough to challenge the validity of the process, I said. It's enough to force a review. Mark corrected. Which is all we need. He leaned forward slightly. There's one more thing, he said. I looked up. The sealed instruction he added. Keller confirmed it will be presented in court if the dispute is formalized. I know it exists, I said. You don't know what's in it. No, I admitted. But Danielle might not either. That's what concerns me, he said. Why? Because if she doesn't know, he replied, she's been building a structure without accounting for it. That's her problem. It becomes your problem. He said, if the court decides everything needs to be reevaluated from the ground up. He wasn't wrong. If capacity became a question, if intent became unclear, everything could unravel, including the parts that protected me. So we don't attack intent, I said. We attack process. Mark nodded. Exactly. I sat there for a moment thinking through it. Danielle's strength was narrative, control, positioning. But her weakness was consistency. She had built too many moving parts, too many adjustments, too many versions. All we have to do, I said slowly, is put every version in front of the same judge and let the inconsistencies surface. Mark finished. I nodded. Then we file, I said. He slid a document toward me. Already drafted, he said. Of course it was. I read through it carefully. Every claim was narrow, precise, no accusations we couldn't support, no emotional language, just structure, timeline inconsistencies, questionable authorization scope, procedural irregularities. I signed it. Not because I was certain of the outcome, but because I was certain of the process. When I handed it back, Mark didn't say anything for a moment. Then, she's going to push back hard, he said. I know. And your family. I thought about that, about the room earlier, the hesitation, the shift. They're already starting to question things I said. They just don't know how far it goes yet. They will, he said. I'm counting on it. I stood to leave, but he stopped me. Genesis. I turned. If the sealed instruction contradicts everything she's built, he said, this ends quickly. And if it doesn't? He held my gaze. Then we rely on what we've built. Fair. I left his office with the copy of the filing in my hand. For the first time since this started, I felt something different. Not anger, not even tension, clarity. Because now there were two paths. Either the sealed document would confirm what I suspected, or the process itself would expose what Danielle had done. Either way, everything was about to be seen together. And that was the one thing she had been trying to prevent. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A message from Danielle. I heard you filed. I stared at it for a second. Then another message came through. You really want to do this in court? I typed back. I want everything reviewed. Her response took longer this time. When it came, it was shorter than I expected. Then be ready for all of it. I locked my phone and sat in the driver's seat, the city lights reflecting faintly across the windshield. All of it. That was the point, because for weeks, everything had been separated, handled in pieces, controlled in fragments. Now it would all be in one place, one timeline, one record, one decision. And for the first time since this started, Danielle wasn't controlling when that would happen. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Not physically, it was the same size it had always been. But once everything was in motion, once both sides were seated, once the judge stepped in, once the clerk began reading the case, it felt like there was less space to hide. Danielle sat across from me, composed as ever. Same posture, same calm expression. If anything, she looked more confident now, like this was the environment she had been preparing for all along. Mark leaned slightly toward me. "Remember," he said quietly, "we're not proving intent. We're showing inconsistency." I nodded. That was the line we couldn't cross. The judge reviewed the filings first. Our challenge was narrow, focused on procedural integrity, authorization scope, and document consistency. Danielle's counsel responded exactly as expected. "Your Honor," he began, "the petitioner is attempting to create doubt where none exists. All documents presented meet legal requirements. All actions taken were within authorized scope. Minimum threshold. Again." I watched the judge's face. No reaction. Just attention. Mark stood next. "We are not disputing that individual documents may appear valid in isolation," he said. "We are asking the court to examine whether those documents remain valid when evaluated together within a consistent timeline." He didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. He simply laid it out. Dates, submissions, withdrawals, revisions, authorization use, transaction alignment, each point connected to the next, not as accusations, as structure. I saw the shift happen gradually, not in Danielle, in the room, because once the sequence was visible, it was hard to unsee. Danielle's attorney pushed back. "These are administrative variations," he argued, "normal in estate preparation. There is no evidence of fraud, coercion, or invalid capacity." He was right. There wasn't. Not directly. And that was exactly why Danielle had built it this way. Right up to the edge. Never over. Until everything was viewed together. Mark didn't argue that point. He stepped aside. "We request that the sealed instruction referenced in the estate filings be opened," he said. That was it. No escalation, no added pressure. Just the request. The room went still. Danielle's attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, we object to introducing documents that are not part of the finalized estate." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled," she said calmly. Just like that. Because the condition had been met. Formal dispute. Full review. I didn't look at Danielle right away. I didn't need to. I could feel the shift beside me. Not panic, but tension. Real this time. The clerk stepped forward with the envelope. It was exactly how Keller had described it. Sealed. Initialed. Untouched. The judge examined it briefly, then opened it. The sound was quiet, but in that room it carried. Paper slid free. She unfolded it and read. The first lines were procedural. Verification. Witness acknowledgement. Date. Then her tone changed slightly. Subtle, but enough. "This document," she said, "is a written instruction from Margaret Edwards, signed and witnessed independently." I felt my chest tighten. Not from fear, from recognition. Because this was it, the one piece Danielle couldn't shape. The judge continued, In the event of any dispute regarding my estate, she read, I request that all recent financial transactions and authorization documents be reviewed for consistency and intent. A pause. Then I have concerns that not all decisions made in my name during my final months fully reflect my direct involvement. The words settled over the room, heavy, measured, irreversible. I looked at Danielle. For the first time, she wasn't composed. Not fully. Her expression hadn't collapsed, but it had shifted, just enough to show that she hadn't expected this. The judge kept reading. No single individual is to be granted unchecked authority without independent verification. Any temporary authorization should be examined in context with prior estate instructions. Context. That word again. Everything together. Exactly what Danielle had avoided. Exactly what I had forced. The judge lowered the paper slightly. There is also an addendum, she said. My pulse picked up. She continued. In the event that inconsistencies are found, I request that the estate be distributed according to the last verified version prior to any disputed changes. That changed everything, because it didn't just question the process, it redirected the outcome. Back to before Danielle's timeline. I felt Mark shift beside me. Not visibly, but enough, because we both understood what that meant. Danielle's attorney stood again. Your Honor, this document raises questions about capacity and it raises questions about process, the judge interrupted. Which is the matter currently before this court? Clear, direct, contained. Danielle finally spoke. Your Honor. She said, her voice steady but tighter than before. My grandmother trusted me to handle her affairs. I acted in her best interest. The judge looked at her. I'm not making a determination on intent at this time, she said. I am determining whether the process requires further review. Danielle didn't respond, because there was nothing to push against. The sealed instruction had done exactly what it was designed to do. Not accuse, not expose directly, just force everything into the same frame. The judge set the document down. Given the concerns raised, she said this court orders a full review of all relevant transactions, authorizations, and estate documents within the specified timeframe. There it was. Not a final ruling. Not yet. But the shift, the one Danielle had tried to prevent. Everything would now be examined together. No isolation. No controlled sequence. Just the full record. Side by side. I exhaled slowly, not realizing I had been holding it. Danielle didn't look at me. Not immediately. She stared straight ahead, her expression returning to something controlled but not untouched, because the advantage she had built was gone, not destroyed, but exposed. And exposure changes everything. As the session moved toward adjournment, the judge added one final note. The court expects full cooperation from all parties, she said. Any attempt to limit access to relevant documentation will be considered accordingly. That wasn't directed broadly. It landed where it needed to. Danielle heard it. I knew she did, because when she finally turned to look at me, there was something different in her eyes. Not anger, not fear. Recognition of what this had become. Not a conversation, not a negotiation, a process she could no longer control. And as we stood to leave, I realized something just as clearly. This wasn't the end. It was the point where everything she had built would finally be tested against everything she had tried to keep separate. The final hearing didn't feel dramatic. No raised voices, no last-minute confessions. Just documents. Stacks of them organized, indexed, placed side by side exactly the way Mark had planned. For the first time, everything existed in one timeline. Every submission Danielle had made, every revision, every authorization, every transaction. No isolation, no sequence she could control, just the full picture. The court-appointed reviewer went first. He wasn't emotional. He didn't speculate. He simply walked the judge through the inconsistencies. The documents, when viewed individually, meet minimum legal standards, he said. However, when evaluated together, there are alignment issues between authorization scope timing and execution. That was the entire case. Not fraud, not intent. Structure. Danielle's attorney tried to reframe it. These are administrative variations, he said again. There is no evidence of malicious conduct, but this time it didn't land the same way, because now there was context, and context changed how everything sounded. The reviewer continued, "The temporary authorization used for financial transactions does not fully align with the authority required for the corresponding estate revisions," he said. Additionally, the timing of document submissions suggests iterative adjustments rather than a consistent execution plan. Iterative adjustments. That was the polite version. I watched Danielle as he spoke. She sat still, focused, but her hands were clasped tighter than before. Not panic, but control under pressure. When it was her turn, she stood. For months, she said, I handled my grandmother's care when others were not present. I made decisions to simplify her affairs and protect her interests. That wasn't entirely untrue. That's what made it complicated. I followed the guidance available to me, she continued, and I acted in good faith. The judge listened, didn't interrupt, didn't react, because this wasn't about belief anymore. It was about alignment. Mark didn't challenge her directly. He didn't need to. He simply returned to the same point. We are not asking the court to determine intent, he said. We are asking the court to determine whether the process as executed can support the current structure. Clean, contained, unavoidable. The judge looked down at the documents for a long moment before speaking. When viewed in isolation, she said the documents appear valid. However, when reviewed collectively, there are inconsistencies that cannot be ignored. She paused. Then, the court finds that the process used to establish the current estate structure lacks sufficient alignment and clarity to be upheld in its present form. Danielle didn't move, didn't speak, but something in her posture shifted. Subtle, final. As a result, the judge continued, the estate will be administered based on the last verified and consistent version of the documents prior to the disputed changes in accordance with the decedent's sealed instruction. There it was. Not a reversal driven by accusation. A reset driven by structure. Everything Danielle had built undone, not because it was illegal, but because it didn't hold together. The judge added one more line. This decision does not assign intent. It assigns outcome based on process. That mattered, because it left Danielle with something. Not guilt, but consequence. The hearing ended shortly after that. People stood. Papers were gathered. Conversations started in low voices. I didn't move right away. I just sat there letting it settle. Not the outcome, the path to it, because it hadn't been sudden. It hadn't been emotional. It had been built line by line until there was nothing left to argue with. When I finally stood, Danielle was already across the room. For a moment, I thought she might leave without saying anything. Instead, she walked over. No anger, no accusation, just quieter. You got what you wanted, she said. I shook my head slightly. No, I replied. I got clarity. She looked at me for a second, then nodded. "I did what I thought was right," she said. "I know I answered. And I meant it, because that was the truth neither of us could ignore. She hadn't set out to destroy anything. She had set out to control it. And somewhere along the way, those became the same thing." We stood there for a moment longer. Then she stepped back. "I don't know what happens now," she said. "That depends," I replied, "on what you expect from here." She didn't answer, because that question didn't have an easy version. Not anymore. I left the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, just settled. For weeks, everything had been tension. Unanswered questions, partial information, controlled access. Now everything had been seen. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to move forward without guessing. A few days later, I went back to my grandmother's house. Alone. The same house. Same smell of lemon polish and old paper, but quieter. Not empty. Just still. I sat at the dining table where we used to go through documents together. Ran my hand over the surface where she used to tap the folders and say, "Read everything." I understood it now, not just as advice, as protection. She knew something felt off. Maybe not everything, maybe not clearly, but enough to leave a system in place that would only work if someone actually paid attention. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won anything. What I felt was finished, not with the family, but with the version of myself that accepted things without verifying them. Danielle and I still speak. Not the same way. Not often. There are boundaries now. Clear ones. Not built out of anger, but out of understanding. Because forgiveness doesn't mean access. And family doesn't mean unquestioned trust. It just means shared history. And what you do with that is your choice. For a long time, I thought situations like this were about choosing sides, about proving someone right and someone wrong. But what I learned is that it's rarely that simple. Sometimes people don't manipulate because they want to harm you. They do it because they believe they're the one who should be in control. And if you don't question it, if you don't look closely, that belief becomes structure. And structure becomes outcome. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. It's clarity. It's deciding what you will verify, what you will accept, and what you will no longer participate in. And forgiveness. It doesn't mean restoring access. It just means you're no longer carrying the weight of what happened. If you've ever been in a situation where something felt off, but everyone else told you it was fine, pay attention to that. Trust it enough to ask questions, not to fight, but to understand. If this story resonates with you, I'd really like to hear your perspective. Where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? And if you want more stories like this, ones that explore truth boundaries and what happens when you finally look closer, you can stay with the channel. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.